Welcome, one and all, to the country of Panem, where you will definitely be obliged to stay against your will. That's right, this video we're going to be going over the Hunger Games books. So I actually really enjoyed this series. It's probably a close second favorite to the Harry Potter series for me, and I was kind of reading them as the movie series was going on actively. And it really is just an interesting interpretation of a futuristic dystopian world. And as you probably saw from the thumbnail, I've literally collected every single pin associated with each movie, including the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. So you can definitely say that I am a fan. So we're going to begin this with the book called The Hunger Games. And this introduces us to the world, an area that used to be North America, which is now the country of Panem, with 12 districts. Each district serves a function in service of the capital, and it's really not a good situation. So basically, each of the districts supply the capital where you have all the rich folk living, and the living situation in a good majority of the districts is not good. They are pretty well slaves, let's be honest. Aside from maybe District 1 and District 2, which are the richest districts of them all. One of them, District 1, supplies luxury items, so they get a little bit more money. And on top of that, you have District 2, which also supplies peacekeepers, which is their police force. So in this book, you meet a character by the name of Katniss Everdeen, living in District 12, one of the poorest districts of them all. And she is basically just trying to survive and keep her family alive. Food is scarce. She's having to go out into the woods in secret, by the way, because if the capital ever found that out, she would likely be executed along with her entire family. She's having to go and hunt game in order to trade in the black markets and to sell to the baker to get bread and all kinds of things. She's really trying the best she can to make ends meet. So you come into the story when reaping day is near. And basically, what that is you have the Hunger Games. And the reaping is a ceremony performed in each district where each district is forced to offer up one boy and girl between the ages of 12 and 18 to pretty much be delivered into a public arena to where they fight to the death until a lone victor remains. And I know, sounds really dark, but it's important to remember there's a lot of radical minded people out there that took that for face value and refused to watch it because of how awful that sounds. But let me be clear, the Hunger Games series is not about the Hunger Games and delivering children pretty much to fight to the death in an arena. What the whole story is actually about is an entire country of citizens finally saying enough is enough and rising up against this tyrannical power in order to fight for something, fight for a more peaceful time to where they don't have to deliver their children into the Hunger Games to be slaughtered, pretty much. So, end rant on that. So, basically, quick synopsis: the reaping is taking place, and Katniss's sister gets selected for the Hunger Games. Well, Katniss wasn't about to have that, so Katniss volunteers for her sister in order to take her place on the Hunger Games. And so she is, along with 23 other people, including a boy from her own district named Peta, delivered to the capital where they're put on show and display pretty much. They get beautified and everything. They take part in interviews, things like that. Basically, their goal during that time is to obtain sponsors. They're trying to make themselves look appealing in order to get more money so that they get more items sent to them in the arena, therefore giving them a better chance of survival. And it's just really interesting all the different moving parts to this whole system. And without spoiling anything else in the story, you get into the arena and it's a bloodbath, of course. But what's interesting is it's not a Colosseum style arena, it is a forest, pretty much. And it is a massive arena where you have to not just worry about the people trying to kill you, but you also have to worry about the elements and exposure because that can kill you just as easily. You really have to incorporate a lot of survival techniques in order to survive. So, long story short, it's a really good book, and I highly recommend it. I don't think anybody wouldn't enjoy reading this book because it's definitely very fascinating and a good way to introduce you to this world. So, I won't go into any more because I want you to discover for yourself everything that takes place in this book. So, in companion with that book, I have a couple of other books here that came out around the time of the first Hunger Games movie. And the first one of which is the Hunger Games Tribute Guide. And basically, the best way I can describe this, it feels like a book that you would actually have in the Capitol while you are witnessing this particular Hunger Games, which is the 74th Hunger Games, by the way. And basically, it goes into a quick synopsis as far as what the games are and how they are laid out, which districts supply tributes, which are the people whose names are drawn and sent to the arena, how they are done, and it talks about the reaping ceremony. And then it gives you a guide of every single tribute that each district sent in that Hunger Games. You know, their name, their height, their attributes, what their skills are, things like that. And then it goes into discussing some of the political figures of that world, like President Snow. He's our main bad of the series, by the way. They call him a president, but we'll call him what he actually is, a dictator, because you either do what he says or you die. And then you have the game makers themselves, the ones who organize the Hunger Games, and they create the arena and all of its attributes, and they usually put a theme to it of some sort. They really just get full, creative liberty on it to do whatever they want, just about. But of course, they have to have final approval from President Snow on just about everything. Then you, of course, have the tribute parade, which is one of the events where they're put on display. And then the actual interviews themselves. It also covers the training center, which is where they spend 2 or 3 days honing their skills, learning new skills before they're actually delivered into the arena. And this book pretty much goes over the weapons that are available and goes all the way up to right before the actual Hunger Games themselves take place. Like I said, this is meant mainly to be a companion book to the Hunger Games, but it's quite fascinating to read through it. This other book is called The World of the Hunger Games, and this one more so covers the entire movie than the other book did. And it basically has a bunch of pictures from the movie itself. You get to see a lot of the familiar actors in it, but it still kind of does the same thing that the tribute guide goes through. It goes through all the different stages of the Hunger Games event itself. And it even covers some of the things that took place in the arena itself, as far as new things that were discovered amongst characters, things like that. And it's an interesting book to read, but of course, neither one of these tops reading the actual book itself. Moving on from that, we have the second book in the series, and this one's called Catching Fire. And to be quite honest, this one is my favorite book in the entire trilogy. And if you'll notice, comparing these two books together, you have a bird on the front cover. So this is a unique bird to the Hunger Games universe. It's the result of genetic modification and pretty much natural selection. So the bird is called a Mockingjay. Now bear with me here. During one of the previous wars in the backstory of this series, the Capitol created a genetically modified bird called a Jabberjay and sent it out to rebel bases in order to collect information that was being voiced by the rebels. And then they would fly back to the Capitol and vocalize the messages that the rebels were speaking, like literally imitate identically their voice. Well, once the war was over, they no longer had use of the Jabberjays, so they released them into the wild. Well, then the Jabberjays mated with the mockingbird, which is a bird that exists in reality, and that created the Mockingjay. Now, the Mockingjay is not capable of imitating human speech, but it is able to imitate song. So it can't imitate words, but it can through birdsong, imitate songs sung by people and imitate other various notes like that. So the Mockingjay pretty much becomes the symbol associated with Katniss. In fact, the particular symbol on the Hunger Games book is the pin that she wears in the arena, because unlike in the movies, the tributes are actually able to bring one personal item into the arena with them, so long as it's not intended to be used as a weapon, pretty much. But good luck with that. So, going along with that trend, you have a Mockingjay on the front of this cover. And this was a bit of a missed opportunity in the movie itself, but it's covered in the book. There's a character that Katniss meets, Plutarch Heavensby, who's now the new head game maker through some events that took place in the first book, but I'll let you find that out for yourself. And he has a particular item on his person. It's a pocket watch. And for a brief moment, he swipes a finger across the face of the pocket watch, and a Mockingjay appears. It's one of those things that Katniss just barely notices. But based off of the design of this book, I believe that this is the Mockingjay that she saw, because you also have spokes on a wheel here that represent the different positions on the face of a clock. So I believe that's what this was meant to represent. So you come back to Katniss in this story, and she's not having the best of times. She's trying to deal with the trauma of the previous Hunger Games the year before, and she now has to go and participate in a tour, pretty much, where she has to visit each and every single district, ultimately ending up in the capital again, where she has to give a speech. And the problem with that is that in some of these districts, that is where some of the tributes came from that she had a hand in killing, whether it was self defense or what have you. So you can imagine how awkward that is. So I won't spoil how those events go down, but you're starting to have whispers of rebellion amongst the districts. And Katniss is noticing things here and there when she notices certain vid screens that are showing events taking place throughout the district, things like that. And people are starting to talk because of some things that she did in the previous Hunger Games. She has now inspired hope in the people. And so she's having to grapple with all of this. And one thing that's in the book that doesn't make it into the movies is District 13. Now, District 13 gets name dropped in the movie, but it goes a whole lot more in depth in the book. Well, first off, you find out that there was at least at one point in time a District 13, and their function was nuclear energy, I believe. But there's some people that have noticed that during some of the propaganda aired on the Capitol television is they have someone allegedly in like a hazmat suit conducting a report on site at District 13, and in the background you can see destroyed buildings smoldering, and they're like, "Oh, it's radioactive and will be for a very long time to come, and nobody should come here. Stay away." But it's brought to Katniss's attention that if you watch closely enough to the footage, you can see in the background a Mockingjay flying a certain path behind the reporter. And if you notice, no matter how different each reporter gives their report on site at District 13, the Mockingjay in the background is still there. So it's starting to inspire doubt, like, oh, what actually happened at District 13? What's really going on here? Because everybody was led to believe that it was reduced to ashes and bombed, everybody killed and made radioactive. So it's really fascinating. But get back around to the time for the Hunger Games again, and this will be the 75th Hunger Games. Now, these particular games come with a twist, and I won't tell you what that is. Um, but basically, every 25th year of the Hunger Games, they have what is called a quarter quell. And that's when they have the games are they're marked by a special significance or a theme. And in order to remind the citizens of a particular whatever, in order to kind of keep their hope crushed or just enough and just to remind them of how they could not stand up against the capital in the previous war. Um, so basically, Katniss is going to have to grapple with some new things here and new obstacles, and the capital's not going to spare any expense with the training center or the arena. And the arena itself has its own twists and turns and, let's say, dangers that I won't go into. But if I can say anything about the author of this book, I call her the queen of cliffhangers. Not only does she end so many chapters with a cliffhanger, but she ends this book with the ultimate cliffhanging line. And I won't spoil that with you because I want you to feel the exact same thing and the weight of what happens at the end of this book the same way that I did. So, yeah, highly recommend. Catching Fire is my favorite book in the series. All right, so on to the last book in the trilogy is one called Mockingjay. So as you can see from the cover, we have an actual Mockingjay on the cover here, and it almost looks like it's breaking free of its restraints. Now, due to the events that took place in Catching Fire, we are now at full-on war amongst the districts. Like, it is really going down now. So Katniss finds herself in a new location, and I won't tell you what that location is, but she is having to grapple with not only the PTSD of going through the Hunger Games, but also having to take upon this mantle of being the Mockingjay of the rebellion. She is the symbol and the voice of the rebellion, and all the districts are looking to her to inspire hope and confidence, pretty much. And she is having a really tough time at the start of this book. And me personally, I didn't think that there was enough in this book to split the final movie into two different parts. Now, granted, they made it work, but it kind of came out in that time where everybody had to copy Harry Potter, like, oh, we got to split the last movie into two parts. We got to do it like that. We just got to do it. But this series did a better job at doing that than some others that I'll mention in some later videos. But basically, we're in the heat of one thing I forgot to mention that you get earlier on in the series is that this is another one of those love triangle series, and Katniss is having to learn her feelings, if you will, because she hasn't been very good at expressing them in the past. And she starts to realize in this book that maybe the person that she had the hots for the whole time wasn't the person that she actually wanted to be with. And it's really interesting to see her character grow and change. But it kind of has a bittersweet ending. And, I think everybody ends up in a fairly good place, but not without tragedy. But that's how war is. So I won't go into any further on this book. It definitely took me a lot longer to get through it than the first two, but it's still a pretty good read. All right. So moving on to the last Hunger Games book currently associated with this series, and I gotta say, I truly enjoyed this book and the way it was written. It is such a masterpiece. And now, can we just take a moment to appreciate that Mockingjay was written and or released in 2010, and the author of this book pretty much disappeared for a decade. Now, granted, she was dealing with filming the movie series of the Hunger Games at the time, but basically takes a step away from writing in this universe for a whole decade, and then in 2020 releases The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, which is an absolute masterpiece. To go that long without writing a book in this series and to come out with something like this really like let me know that she put all the work she possibly could into it. And so this book takes place 60 years before the events of the Hunger Games trilogy. And instead of Katniss, of course, you are following the main character Coriolanus Snow, who eventually becomes President Snow. And this is a real and true villain origin story right here. So you're learning about the country of Panem as it is post-war of the Dark Days, which are the events that eventually led up to the Hunger Games. So basically, in the universe of the Hunger Games, you have three total separate wars that took place. You have the first war, which was over resources, which resulted in the destruction of society as we know it, and the country of Panem emerged with 13 districts. Then you have the Second War, which is when the districts rose up in rebellion against the capital and all their mistreatment, which resulted in the destruction of District 13 and the emergence of the Hunger Games as form of punishment on the districts for how they rebelled against the capital. And then you have the Third War, which is the one that Katniss actually takes part in order to fight for the freedom of Panem. Now, this book, Snow is basically a teenager, and we're at the 10th Hunger Games, and he's still in school, and he's having to deal with academics and his almost starving family, and he's having to basically take upon the mantle of the Snow family that his father left behind. And there's a bit of a twist on the Hunger Games in this particular year. So instead of former tributes who are now victors from the districts mentoring the tributes, you have the Academy students themselves acting as mentors for the tributes in this case. And this has an effect on their final grade in the school and everything else. So there's obviously a lot of awkwardness associated with that and quite a lot of dangers as well. But you are introduced to a character called Lucy Gray Baird. And what's interesting about her character and her family, if you will, is that they did not originate from the districts. They are a traveling musical family with instruments and all. And I believe they were Covey, if I remember correctly. And they just so happened to happen across the boundary of Panem where they were rounded up and obliged to stay, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video. And just because they weren't from the districts doesn't mean they were immune to being selected for the Hunger Games. So Lucy Gray Baird is the female tribute of District 12 this year for the 10th Hunger Games, and she is paired up with Snow as a mentor. So Snow basically has to figure out how to get Lucy to survive and how to make her appealing in order to get sponsors so that he can do things for her in the arena. And we discover that Lucy has quite the talent for singing, and that really goes a long way. And that's pretty much the first part of the book. In the second part of the book, and going into the third part, because there's different acts that separate this book. Due to the events of the Hunger Games, Snow has to go and serve as a peacekeeper in District 12. And that's pretty much where he gets to spend his summer, though he's thinking he's got to spend 20 some years here because he was basically exiled because of something that took place in the Hunger Games. Because if anybody knows Snow, he's a snake and he's very cunning and he will do anything that he can to succeed. And you'll find out more of that about his character as you read along. But things basically snowball from there once he gets into District 12, and it is a very, very dark book. And if I can say anything for the movie that was adapted from this book, this has got to be one of the closest book to movie adaptations I've ever seen. And I was super happy with how they handled it and everything and all the details that they put into it. Like, and some of the lines in there were almost word for what these characters did and said. So yeah, highly recommend. Even if you read this book by itself, it's still really good. She does a good job introducing you to the world itself. So yeah, this one comes highly recommended. So that covers all the books in this particular video. I meant to say this in some earlier on videos, but I hope you enjoy this series and that you find a lot of. I just hope you enjoy it as much as I did going through it, because they are really well written books and it's great world building, and it provides you like a bit of an escape for a while into another world that isn't your own. So I'm not going to be one of those YouTubers that, ask you to like and subscribe and all that. Everybody knows what those buttons do and how to use them, and every other YouTuber is constantly reminding you how to do it. So you guys are going to choose to like this video or to subscribe to this channel. You're going to either choose to or not to. It's whatever. So anyways, that's that. Hope you guys enjoy this video and have a great day.